Good morning. My name is Anusha and my topic is authentication. So, what is authentication? As computers and other digital devices have grown increasingly important in business and commerce, they've also become more vulnerable to cyber attacks. To utilize a computing device with confidence, a firm or individual must first be certain that the equipment is not compromised in any way and that all connections are safe. So authentication is the process of verifying the identity of the users or information. By doing this, authentication assures secure systems, secure processes, and enterprise information security. There are different types of authentication systems. Single factor authentication. The practice of requiring a user ID and password is known as single factor authentication. This was the first method of security that was developed. On this authentication system, the user has to enter the username and the passwords to confirm whether the user is logging in or not. Now, if the username or password is wrong, then the user will not be allowed to log in or access the systems. So the advantages of single factor authentication are it is very simple to use and a straightforward system. It is not at all costly. The user does not need any huge technical skills. The disadvantages are it is not at all password secure. It will depend on the strength of this password entered by the user. The protection level in single factor authentication is much low. Two-factor authentication. In this authentication system, the user must give a username, password, and other information. There are various types of authentication systems that are used by the user for securing the system. This type of authentication adds an extra layer of protection to the process by requiring users to provide a second authentication factor in addition to the password. Two-factor authentication systems often require the user to enter a verification code received via text messages on a pre-registered mobile phone or mobile device, or a code generated by an authentication application. The additional authentication factors, such as a unique code that is provided to the user over a mobile device, when a sign-on option is attempted or a biometric signature like a facial scan or thumbprint is used. So the advantages are it provides the better security, the productivity and the flexibility increases, prevents the loss of trust. And the disadvantages are it is time consuming. Multi-factor authentication. In this type of authentication, more than one factor of authentication is required. This gives the better security to the user. When three or more identity verification factors are used for authentication, for example, a user ID and a password, a biometric signature, and perhaps a personal question the user must answer, these are the main factors of the authentication. The advantages are no risk of security, no information could get stolen, no risk of any keylogger activity, no risk of any data getting captured. The disadvantages are it is time consuming, it can rely on third parties. How does the authentication work? Traditionally, authentication was accomplished by the systems or resources being accessed. For example, a server would authenticate users using its own password system, login IDs, or usernames and passwords. During authentication, the user's credentials are matched to those stored in the database of authorized users' information, which can be found on the local operating system servers or via an authentication server. The user is given access if the credentials entered match those on file and the authenticated entity is authorized to use the resource. User permissions grant which resources a user has access to, as well as any other access rights associated with the users, such as hours during which the users can access the resource and the amount of resource that the user is authorized to consume. However, the web application protocols, hypertext transfer protocol, and HTTP secure are stateless, meaning that strict authentication would require end users to re-authenticate each time they access a resource applications. To simplify user authentication for web applications, the authenticating system issues a signed authentication token to the end user applications. That token is appended to every request from the client. This means that users do not have to sign on every time they use a web application. Authentication factors. There are many authentication factors like a knowledge factor, possession factor, inherence factor, location factor, and the time factor. Knowledge factor. The knowledge factor or something you know may be any authentication credentials that consist of information that the user possesses, including a personal identification number, PIN, a username, a password, or the answer to a secret question. Possession factor. The position factor or something you know may have any credential based on items that the user can own and carry with them, including hardware devices like a security token or a mobile phone used to accept a text message or to run an authentication app that can generate a one-time password or PIN. Inherence factor. The inherence factor or something you are is typically based on some form of biometric identification, including fingerprints or thumbprints, facial recognition, retina scan, or any other form of biometric data. Location factor. Where you are may be less specific, but the location factor is sometimes used as an adjunct to other factors. Location can be determined to reasonable accuracy by devices equipped with the GPS or with less accuracy by checking network addresses and routes. The location factor cannot usually stand on its own for authentication, but it can supplement the other factors by providing a means of ruling out some requests. For example, it can prevent an attacker located in a remote geographical area from posing as an user who normally logs in only from their home or office in the organization's home country. Time factor. Like the location factor, the time factor or when you are authenticating is not sufficient on its own, but it can be a supplemental mechanism for weeding out attackers who can access a resource at a time when that resource is not available to the authorized user. For example, if the user was lost authenticated at noon in the US, an attempt to authenticate from Asia 1 hour later would be rejected based on the combination of time and location. Authentication methods, OTP, biometrics, mobile authentication, continuous authentication, application programming interface, API authentication, and password authentication. Traditional authentication depends on the use of a password file in which user IDs are stored together with the hashes of the passwords associated with each user. When logging in, the password submitted by the user is hashed and compared to the value in the password file. If the two hashes match, the user is authenticated. This approach to authentication has several drawbacks, particularly for resources deployed across different systems. So we use more authenticated methods like OTP. An OTP is an automatically generated numeric or alphanumeric string of characters that authenticates a user. This password is only valid for one login session or transaction and is typically employed for new users or for users who have lost their password and are given an OTP to log in and change to a new password. Biometrics. While some authentication systems depend solely on biometric identification, biometrics are usually used as a second or third authenticated factor. The more common types of biometric authentications available include fingerprint scans, facial or retinal scans, and voice recognition. Mobile authentication. Mobile authentication is the process of verifying users via their devices or verifying the devices themselves. This enables users to log into secure locations and resources from anywhere. The mobile authentication process involves multi-factor authentication that can include OTPs, biometric authentication, or quick response code. Continuous authentication. With continuous authentication, instead of a user being either logged in or out, a company's application continually computes an authentication score that measures how sure it is that the account owner is the individual who is using the device. Application Programming Interface API authentication. The standard methods of managing API authentication are HTTP basic authentication, API keys, and open authorization. In HTTP basic authentication, the server requests authentication information such as username and password from a client. The client then passes the authentication information to the server in an authorization header. In the API key authentication method, a first-time user is assigned a unique generated value that indicates that the user is known. Then each time the user tries to enter the system again, the unique key is used to verify they are the same user who entered the system previously. Authorization is an open standard for token-based authentication and authorization on the internet. It enables a user account information to be used by third-party services such as Facebook without exposing the user's password. OAuth acts as an intermediary on behalf of the user, providing the service with an access token that authorizes specific account information to be shared. Password authentication. Simple password authentication offers an easy way of authenticating users. In password authentication, the user must supply a password for each server, and the administrator must keep track of the name and password for each user, typically on separate servers. So, password is one of the authenticated method, but it doesn't offer a sufficient security because it is very hard for us nowadays to remember all the passwords we need for all the online services we use. This is the reason why many rely on password managers or write it on the book or they store in a file. These are the measures with very low security levels. Not to forget the danger presented by a keylogger software that can read and record keystrokes. This way, a hacker can still get your password very easily despite a high degree of password difficulty. This becomes even greater when using in public networks such as Wi-Fi in a coffee shop, on public transport, or computers in libraries, or an internet cafe. Always check you are surfing encrypted website or providing an SSL certificate for your own web presence to ensure encrypted communications. This is the distribution of passwords pie chart. So 2% of the people use two characters as the password, and 14% use three characters as a password, and four characters, that is all letters. 14% of the people use it, and 22% of the people use five letters and all in the same case, and 19% of the people use six letters, that is lowercase, and 15% of the people use the words that are in dictionaries or list of the names. So mostly 86% of the people use the data which can be easily hacked by the people. So only 14% of the people use the good passwords for which that cannot be encrypted easily. Machine authentication. Machines also need to authorize their automated actions within a network. Online backup services, patching and updating systems, and remote monitoring systems, such as those used in telemedicine and smart grid technologies, all need to securely authenticate to verify that is the authorized user involved in an interaction and not a hacker. Machine authentication can be carried out with machine credentials similar to a user's ID and password, but submitted by the device in question. Machine authentication may also use digital certificates issued and verified by a certificate authority as a part of public key infrastructure to provide identification while exchanging information over the internet. With the increasing number of internet-enabled devices, reliable machine authentication is crucial to enable secure communication for home automation and other Internet of Things applications, where almost any entity may be made addressable and able to exchange data over a network. It is important to realize that each access point is a potential intrusion point. Each network device needs strong machine authentication.
And despite their normally limited activity, these devices must be configured for limited permissions access to restrict what can be done even if they are breached.
Thank you.